Attention Caribbean authors and creators. Are you looking to elevate your literary journey? This is Kevin George, your host and presenter from TLC Tropical Literature Creatives, and I'm thrilled to share an exciting opportunity with you, introducing our bespoke promotional services designed exclusively for authors of Caribbean heritage. Whether you're a seasoned professional or a rising star, we're here to amplify your voice. From getting the word out about your book launch, your self-publishing services, or workshops, to sharing services that you offer to fellow authors and creatives. Visit our website or reach out to us today to explore how we can tailor our expertise to showcase your literary brilliance. Let's unlock the next chapter of success together. Greetings, listenership. Welcome to TLC Tropical Literature Creatives, the podcast where we interview authors of Caribbean heritage about themselves and about their literary works. Today we have with us author Juleus Ghunta. Juleus, welcome to TLC Tropical Literature Creatives.
Thank you very much, Kevin. It's such a pleasure to be with you.
The pleasure is all ours. We're always eager to interview authors of Caribbean heritage, and we're very eager to talk to you today, Mr. Ghunta.
Thank you. Just Julius is fine.
Okay, well,
Thank you so much. And thank you too for the work that you're trying to do to provide Caribbean writers with a platform to share their experiences and to encourage other Caribbean writers. It's really appreciated.
I mean, I'm really glad that the authors themselves make themselves available, because I like to interview persons, I like to talk, and I like to learn. And when the authors themselves are available to share what it is that they know, I feel like I leave with something. So as much as it's a pleasure for you to be interviewed, it's a pleasure for me to interview you.
Thank you. Well, before we get into it, I'm not sure if you heard, but a few days ago, Jamaican, the Caribbean, and indeed world literature lost to Professor Edward Baugh. Professor Baugh was a premier Caribbean poet and intellectual, known particularly for his work as a Derek Walcott critic, but also as one of our foremost poets. Professor Baugh was a personal inspiration to me. And in fact, his poem, I Wish You a Leaf Falling, is my favorite poem of all time. I don't know if we have time today to talk about why this is so and how it has influenced me. But in honor of Professor Baugh's life, if it is fine with you, I'd love to read this poem as a way of saying goodbye to him.
You can proceed, man. We go for it.
I wish you a leaf falling. I wish you a leaf falling from the tree of heaven, catching rare angles of the light as it twirls in its fall, ever so slowly. Such music, such flute notes, such silence as it brushes your lips, and the turning earth pauses at their tremble. You snatch at it playfully. It slips your fingers and falls at your feet and is still. In the fall of a leaf, such ascension. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Ghunta.
You're welcome. You know, I love this part of this poem. And I know we have a lot of things to talk about today, but in the fall of a leaf, such ascension. I don't know if you've ever had that experience sitting under a tree and gazing at leaves falling, and whether or not this line in the fall of a leaf, there's something that is so spiritual and metaphysical about that experience, you know, so that once you're paying attention to it. And this was Baugh's strength, his ability to capture these quotidian, everyday experiences in really profound and memorable language. He will be missed.
Okay, thank you very much for that tribute.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I mean, there are a number of questions that I ask authors, but I think by the tribute, you pretty much answered one of them, in that I usually ask authors, you know, what influenced their work, you know, and I could take it for granted through the tribute that Professor Baugh, he really was one of the persons who was an influence on the work that you have done and the work that you are doing right now.
Yes, in terms of my poetry writing, certainly. I often turn to Baugh's work for inspiration. but many others like Professor Baugh, Roger Robinson from Trinidad, Camilla from Jamaica, some young, brilliant writers from Nigeria or of Nigerian descent who live in the UK and the United States. So many people, but not just writers. I turned to my grandmother, who was not able to read, but who herself was a kind of writer, because we're all writing in our own way. I turned to my grandfather and the grandfather that I did not know. So my experiences, influences are multifarious, I would say. And while many of them came out of a very difficult and traumatic childhood, I am grateful for them now because of the wisdom that I have gained from those experiences.
Well said. I think one of the things I like about that statement is you are able to attribute a lot of the things that you do now to the influences that you would have had from a number of persons. I personally think that the success that a person achieves in life, some persons may say that they're self-made success, but I kind of disagree with that because I think at some point in time, the interactions that we've had with persons, they set us on a course to what it is that we seek to achieve in this life. And from the things that you have just described, from the persons who you have singled out, and I'm sure that there are more, but too many to call out at this point in time, it is just encouraging to know that no man is an island.
Yeah, I feel the same way. And even if those experiences were negative, they still influence you in some way. I'm not saying that you should necessarily be thankful for those negative experiences, but simply to acknowledge that they were a part of your journey. And if you're speaking about memories and the ways in which our memories continue to impact us, that they are indeed still a part of your journey.
Indeed. For the persons who are tuning into this podcast, which Caribbean island do you share an affiliation with?
All of them, but I'm Jamaican. I am Jamaican. I grew up in Jamaica. When I graduated UA, many years ago, I left Jamaica the first chance I got. I was running away from the country. I was running away from the family, my family, and in some ways, I was running away from myself. And I ran to Barbados for a couple of weeks and then to Grenada, where I worked in a grassroots program that focused on stimulating children from economically impoverished families so that they would be able to compete academically when they enter the formal education system. And from there, I escaped again to Dominica, where I lived for a few months. And so, and I've been to other islands too, such as Antigua. I was a member of a steering committee that conducted a peace building conference in St. Kitts back in 2011, along with other Caribbean youth peace activists from Trinidad and Guyana and Bahamas. So fortunately for me, I have had this, I would say, a few great years of hopping from one island to the other and learning about the things that connect us and also those that are sort of dividing us.
It's just interesting the term that you use, how it is that you escape from one island to the other. And while, you know, in air quotes, I say escaping, you would have had a number of experiences. You would have, again, interacted with a number of persons. You would have gained a number of skills. You would have filled a number of roles. And again, you would find yourself growing. And this, I'm not making light of your experiences, but it just brings to mind, you know, the TV series I looked at when I was younger called The Fugitive, because it was something similar. He would be running from town to town, and while he would be running, he would find himself doing different jobs, and he would be gaining different skills over time and interacting with different persons. So it's just interesting that you use the term escaping, and I remember The Fugitive and seeing similarities between the two of you. That's all.
And that's fine. I mean, if I have not necessarily used the word fugitive, but I can say quite sort of definitively that I have been a kind of sort of fugitive, but running away in particular from my myself and my experiences, trying to run to clarity, to hope, to stability, to health. And this has characterized much of my life. And for a lot of people, there is something beautiful about having this kind of experience, living in different countries, different cultures. It was great for me from some perspectives, but it was also quite difficult because even though I was moving from one place to another, I was not necessarily getting answers to the questions that I had. Fortunately, now I'm in a place where, after all those years of moving between islands and countries and continents, I feel like I have reached a plateau of sorts where many of the fundamental challenges that I felt I had are no longer present in the ways that they were present back then.
I'm glad to hear that there's maybe I don't want to use the word, but maybe this is the best word that I can think of right now. There has been a resolution of sorts personally is concerned with you. So if it is that you have a degree of peace, then I'm personally glad to hear that. Obviously, you're not a full-time author. Can you tell us a bit more about the jobs or the roles that you find yourself in at this time?
Sure. So I am a student at the moment, studying social work in Alberta. This is something that I've always wanted to do. Because of my challenging background, I wasn't able to pursue the stream because of financial hurdles. I did, however, benefit from several scholarships, including one that took me to the UK on a Shevening program where I earned a master's degree. But the Shevening is sort of limited in terms of what you can do. And I wasn't able to pursue the stream. So this is what I'm doing now. But I'm also doing 3 jobs at the same time. 2 of them are at this college where I'm studying, one as a tutor, one as an instructor in English. And I run a small editing company that works with organizations across the Caribbean and also students, mostly at the master's level, primarily in the UK. Students who, for various reasons, find academic work really difficult. And this in particular is very fulfilling for me because of my own academic and literacy challenges and the wisdom, the knowledge that I have gained from my reflections, introspection, as well as from my self-directed academic research as it relates to how to handle some of these issues. I have done various jobs. Most recently, I worked in Japan as an educator, and that was an interesting, challenging experience, and as a teacher trainer as well. And so I have a sort of number of different types of experiences that shape who I am now and what I do and hope to do.
If I must say, I think that you sound like a very well-rounded individual. If it's not for the travels that you have done or the portfolios that you have been holding, I have to admit, I am very much impressed. Not many persons can say that they can hold 3 jobs down with a degree of competence and confidence.
Well, you're very kind.
In terms of writing, have you always been a writer, or is it something that a skill that you developed over time?
Well, certainly I haven't always been a writer or a reader. I learned to read actually when I was 11, 12 years old. I entered primary school, well, let's say basic school, when I was 5 years old. Typically in Jamaica, children go at 3. I couldn't go before that because my mother couldn't afford to send me to school. So when I went eventually, I was behind, and I was going to school at a time, I suppose it still goes on, when teachers were given permission to whip the children when they misbehaved. And I was a problematic child. So I endured a lot of abuse as a child, and this, of course, affected my ability to learn. And so the answer to that is no. In fact, I hated reading because whenever I thought about reading, I thought about shame. I thought about being humiliated. I thought about dunce roll, which is something that teachers did and still do in Jamaican schools and elsewhere in the Caribbean, where the bright students are put in one section of the class and the slow students. And then sometimes they speak very openly as though the students are invisible about who is bright and who is dunce. And I remember some of those conversations and how those conversations affected me as a student, as a boy, along with the many other boys who populated dunce rows in my primary school. And so reading was something that created a deep sense of fear and worthlessness in me. And it took a remarkable teacher, in fact, a teacher trainer, to help me to get over that. Came to my primary school, Kendall Primary in Hanover, to do 3 months, started a reading program. I was the first to enter and the last to leave. Why did I stick with her? Well, because she was kind to me. She was incredibly kind. I tested her as children do, and she remained calm and supportive and gave me perhaps the greatest gift, one of the greatest gifts I would say that anyone has given me, this gift of literacy that has had a tremendous impact on my life.
I at this point in time, if there are teachers who are listening to this, I hope that they take note because sometimes it doesn't feel like the work that they are doing is significant or it is making any impact at that point in time. So when it is that you make statements like that, for those who have been putting in the effort, it is a relief. So I mean, I know the interview is still ongoing. So on behalf of the teachers, thank you. All
No,
right.
I think that's an important thing to say. Thank you.
Then let's just take a brief break and then we will return with a couple of more questions. Greetings, listenership. We're back from that very short break. Before the break, Mr. Julius was giving some insight into his background. Believe it or not, he wasn't always an avid or excited reader or writer, but rather through the interactions of a teacher that led to his appreciation for literature. So as we get into the interview, we get into a bit more details with Mr. Julius. Mr. Julius, um, just a couple more questions for you.
Yes.
To date, how many books have you written?
I have authored or co-authored, I think about 7 books.
Seven is a great number. I mean, compared to from a person who wasn't too keen on reading to authoring or co-authoring 7 books, that's quite impressive.
It's a kind of miracle. Yes, I agree. I agree. So some of these books are authored by myself, and I actually published 4 issues of Interview in the Caribbean Journal, which is published by University of the West Indies Press, which I worked on primarily with Professor Opal Palma-Disa. So I keep those as my publications as well.
Interesting. When going through your details, the 2 books that stood out to me were the ones, well, first off, I wasn't aware that you did some poetry, but it makes some sense now as you spoke about the professor.
Yes, so I would consider myself a poet primarily. I'm very interested in children's literature. I think I'm trying to fill a gap in my childhood, to be honest. In fact, the 2 picture books that I've published, or 3, are books that I wanted when I was a boy in Kendall, in Hanover, Jamaica, going through the particular challenges I was going through. I didn't have those books. The books that I had were books from America that were part of what an organization like Hands Across the Sea in the Eastern Caribbean is pushing against now, this idea of book dumping, where you just send anything to, people in global South countries. So it was a book, one of the first books I read of the book, and Eskimos and so on, which is fine. It's fine for students to learn. But if you are like me, a student who desires a certain kind of literature that reflects his experience because of what I was going through, I was not just reading for pleasure. I was reading for inspiration and for hope. I couldn't find those books. And it felt really audacious then, as an 11-year-old struggling to read, to say, one day I am going to write these books. So these books are those books that I wish I had when I was a child. In fact, the first one and the second one, both of them are autobiographies that examine some of the struggles that I had. For instance, Tata and the Big Bad Bull tells the story of this really resilient boy who could not go to school because his grandmother couldn't afford to send him. And so instead of giving up and staying home, he decided to be brave and go through this expansive pasture where there were some fierce sort of cattle. And it was very risky for him. There was this very dangerous and angry bull at the beginning of at the entrance of the pasture who kept stopping him from going through. And the story is about how through his persistence he managed to befriend the bull and to go to school to get an education. The bull in the story is a literal bull and a metaphorical bull. As a 9-year-old, 10-year-old, my mom didn't have any money to send me to school. And she would give the money to my older sister. And I would go through this pasture. And on my way home one evening, I was attacked by this bull. I was standing outside of the barbed wire fence, watching it for about 30 minutes. It was just staring at me. Then I decided to be brave. I spread the fence open, and as soon as I stepped on it, charged. I was lucky to escape that experience alive. And so when I went to the library, I wanted to see myself, a boy, perhaps in my naivety, a boy who looked like me being attacked by a bull. I wanted that same book, and it wasn't there. So I am very happy that having gone through all of this and these many years, I managed to write these books. And you know what is beautiful about this? I went back to Hanover. This book was launched initially in the UK while I was a student at the Bradford Literature Festival. I wanted to launch it in my community. So I went to the community library and we had a great book launch. But I wanted to be memorable for those kids. So we put the kids in buses and we took them from Lucy Town to where I lived. I grew up in Hanover. And I took them from my home on that same journey, on foot, through the pasture, so that they could see what I did in order to get an education. And we also did this to raise awareness of the need to reopen a local library in the community that had been closed for about a decade or so. And we managed to accomplish all of that with the support of Sandals Foundation that came on board and reopened that library so that kids could access those books. So it's just a wonderful thing to be able to tell stories, whether these stories are fictionalized or based on real experience, but particularly special, I would say, for somebody like me who has in some ways come full circle now, where I'm able to use these stories to inspire others to dream of a different kind of life.
Julius, you're giving an account as to your experiences, and I feel goosebumps because sometimes we look back on when we were children and we look at some of the things that we have done, and I don't know if you've ever had this thought has ever crossed your mind, but sometimes I wonder how it is I have survived to be an adult because of some of the decisions that I have made. Because I mean, you're talking about, crossing the field and facing this bull. And I mean, you survived and we are thankful for that. But sometimes you don't think, about, what would have happened if things didn't go favorably. So
I do. Sorry for cutting.
Mm-hmm.
No, I was going to say, I do think about that because this is one of the things that I find particularly challenging even today. Thinking about what I did in order to give myself a chance to get out of that place, physically and psychologically.
Mm-hmm.
And that I wouldn't want any child. We encourage children to be resilient, to show grit, to be determined, but I wouldn't want any child to have, no child should have to sacrifice as much as I did to get an education. What I've told you is not even 5% of my story. And what I find particularly challenging today is the fact that many did not make it out. Many of my childhood friends, peers, are in prison. Some have become career criminals. Many have done despicable things, murdered others, including murdered some we grew up with. And there's this guilt that I'm carrying as well, with having, in some ways, escaped all of that. And it's a sort of a different thing when you see in the news that someone else was killed, and you don't know these people. But then it's different when you know these people, because you slept in the same bed, quite literally, with them, ate out of the same pots, quite literally. And sometimes I don't know what to make of this whole experience, to be honest. It's as you said, it is not, I don't have many moments of clarity where everything fits into a logical sequence. I feel very fortunate and lucky to have escaped.
I mean, we're here to talk about the books and about your story, and you're telling me that the things that you'd have experienced is not even 5%. I mean, I wish we had more time, because I wanted to get, into the 95% of the thing, but I'm not going to push it. I'm hoping that at some point in time you may do an autobiography about the 95%, and that when you publish the book, I can have you here as a guest again.
Thank you.
But it's really good to hear you give an account as to, what happened when your book got published, and what happened afterwards to make your book available to other persons. And it's a really unique experience to have your story be told like that, not for the point of just solely telling a story, but to have persons be able to identify themselves in a story. And as much as, they might not have been the person crossing the field and having to face the bull, as you identify, the bull doesn't just have to be an actual physical bull. It could be a mental block that is preventing someone from moving from one point to another. So
that's right.
So it is. I like this story, Julius. I like this story. But but we have a couple more questions. And like I said, when you write the autobiography, we're going to have you here again.
All right.
In terms of your book, is it self-published, or did you go through like a traditional publisher to get your book out?
So everything that I've done, all of the books have been traditionally published except one. So I would say, well, my most recent effort, which again is something that I wanted to do. So it's like a childhood dream that I just had to fulfill. So I wasn't even thinking about the commercial aspects of things. But the book before that, Rohan Bullkin and the Shadows, I would say, is my most recent book. And that was published by Caribbean Reads Publishing.
Is this the only book that you say was self-published, and the others
No, the one after that, which is like a notebook that is connected to Rohan Bullkin and the Shadows. And again, there are stories behind this notebook very, very quickly. So as part of my effort to learn to read, I decided that I would create what I called notebooks of words and ideas. There were times I couldn't even afford notebooks, so it would be scraps of paper that I tied together with strings or something. And each time I learned a new word, I wrote the definition of the word, the part of speech, and I would keep all of those words in these little books until I had a stock of books. And every day I would write 4 of those words on a piece of paper, put it in my pocket, and every chance I get, I would look at the words and try to learn them. That is how I improve my vocabulary. So what I did is that I created a notebook based on this experience that I had to encourage children to read. The difference with this notebook is that it has some really wonderful quotes about reading and literacy. I worked really hard to get permission to use these quotes from many well-known writers and philosophers. For example, Chimamanda Adichie from Nigeria, one of the foremost writers in the world, from philosophers. And so it was a really sort of challenging process. It has blank pages, colored pages, pastel colored pages, line pages. It even has illustrations for children to color. So it should be used as a kind of companion to any book that the child is reading, or if a child wants to use it as a journal, it can be used in this way as well. So that's something that I self-published and really wanted to get that done. I shared the idea with a couple of potential publishers, but they didn't really get what I was trying to accomplish. In the end, I was actually offered, given an offer to have it traditionally published, and I decided to just do it by myself because it was sort of less complicated, and I had already invested a lot of my own money in it. And I also wanted to have a feel of that experience, to be honest, because everything else I had done had been done through publishers. And I wanted to see, quite frankly, if this would have yielded better financial outcomes going at it on my own.
I mean, in retrospect, did it yield better financial outcome, or was it just personally? Did you feel more personally accomplished having self-published this item as compared to the others?
Financially, no, but I didn't push it at all, to be honest. When it came out, I talked a little bit about it, but after that, I just decided to let it be. So I keep forgetting the second part of your double barrel question.
No, I'll have to ask my questions better. The first part of the question you answered already, but the
Yes.
second part is profitable, if not financially. Was it financial personally?
Yes, of course. All of these.
I think so.
Absolutely. All of these have been incredibly profitable in that sense. And even though I've made a lot of money from, well, it depends, if I look at this broadly, my books have made millions in Jamaican dollars, if I look at things broadly, because the writing that I've done has helped me to gain a lot of scholarships, and including the Shevening Scholarship, worth maybe 50 or 60,000 pounds. So that's money. When I went into those interviews, or what I wrote on my application were about my work as a writer, and this is what helped me to get those opportunities. So it wouldn't be accurate to say that I haven't made money from my writing, at least in that sense. For instance, I recently won a prestigious award from the Writers Guild of Alberta. Every year, the Writers Guild selects 7 upcoming writers to finish a project. Unfortunately, I was one of 7 selected from about 65 applicants this year, and paired with a well-known writer who works at the University of Calgary, with whom I'll meet for about 4 or 5 months or so to finish a collection of poems. It's very difficult to put a monetary value on something like that. It's my writing that got me that. It would have cost, I imagine, thousands to do that out of my pocket. So yes, I would say quite, well, not very profitable, but obviously I've benefited greatly from my endeavors in that sense.
So if I'm to understand this correctly, your writings, even though, like you said, you didn't profit financially, it sort of served as like a portfolio of sorts, which made you viable for other opportunities later on.
Right. And these are opportunities that I would have had to pay for out of my pocket anyway, like to study for a master's degree. So to have somebody pay for that on account of the written work, it's still very clearly a financial gain.
And I mean, this is interesting. I mean, we're progressing with the interview, and you're talking about your origins at 11, not liking to read and write. And here we are, finding ourselves winning awards for writings that you would have done. I mean, yeah, the story just keeps on getting more interesting. You would have won awards, etc. Has anyone approached you personally about, their thoughts and their views on the book? How has the reception been on a personal basis? Have persons written letters? Have they sent you emails? They told you about the things that they liked about the book and what they didn't like of the book? And the book in particular I'm referring to is Tata.
Yeah, the response to Tata and the Big Bad Bull was very, very positive. As I said, it was published when I was a student, and I was invited, the only student in that year, to attend the Bradford Literature Festival in that city, where I studied in Bradford. The book is in libraries and schools across the Eastern Caribbean, sent there primarily through the work of Hands Across the Sea. And I have like even today, I get messages from people about how much they love that story. It's a rhyming story. It's about a difficult experience, but it's incredibly fun with great illustrations too by Anne-Catherine Lowe, the illustrator who did it out of the UK. And I would say, no book is perfect. It's not for me, but it was a really great first effort, and it was well reviewed as well. Many positive reviews.
Okay. I mean, that is encouraging. So far, you've mentioned how the books have benefited you, maybe not so much financially, but in terms of the opportunities that have presented themselves to you. You were talking about earlier on your interaction with your teacher, how it did affect you. Looking back at the interaction with the teacher then, and looking at yourself now, do you find yourself in a position where you are able to mentor persons, where it is that where there are persons who are younger who may have difficulty reading, writing, etc., where you are providing guidance, instruction, direction, etc.?
Yes, I would say that this is perhaps the major part of my advocacy and my research, where I am concerned about the nexus between childhood adversity and poor academic outcomes. What is the connection between a child going through various adverse child experiences and then later on struggling, not just in school to perform academically, but struggling as well with things like impulse control, the ability to delay gratification, those key executive functions and skills that we need in our children for them to perform well. And so much of this work is also quite practical. I mentioned earlier that I'm a member of Jamaica's National Task Force on Character Education, where we're trying to implement a national character education framework that will provide key insights and tools to educators on how to manage problematic children, which is a serious issue right across the Caribbean that I have witnessed myself, and of course that we know through literature as well, in terms of poor academic outcome, particularly among boys, and poor accompanying behaviors. I work currently. One of my jobs is actually working with Indigenous students in Canada. And for those who don't know, Indigenous people here have had a similar colonial experience with their communities decimated, destroyed by white supremacy and colonization. And we see the ramifications of these experiences in the vast challenges with addictions in indigenous communities, poor academic performances in schools, violence, imprisonment. And I am fortunate to have opportunities to share my story and the skills that I've learned through my own experience with indigenous students. And some of them, mature students in their 40s, 50s, and so on, were just now getting an opportunity to earn a high school diploma. So I very much enjoy this more sort of practical side of things. I come from an advocacy background. I've been a part of marches, led marches in several countries across the Caribbean. I've done hunger strikes. I've had quite an interesting journey to sort of raise awareness of many issues that are key to our development agendas in the region.
With the experiences that you've had, with the portfolios that you've held, obviously reading and writing is a challenge for persons. For persons who may be listening to this podcast, who may be parents, who may be guardians, who may also be teachers, and who may be trying to find creative ways to help encourage persons to read or to write a bit more. Do you have any advice for persons who may be listening to this podcast, who may be dealing with persons who are young and they're trying to encourage them to read or to write a bit more?
Yes. Okay. So this perhaps, in my view at least, as it relates to the context of this interview, is maybe the most important thing. that I will say. I would advise parents, educators, etc., to learn about adverse childhood experiences. Now, we all know about the difficult experiences that children go through, such as physical abuse, sexual abuse, poverty, etc. But many of us do not understand from a scientific perspective how these experiences impact children's ability to learn. Now, this is the focus of my book, Rohan Bullkin and the Shadows. This book draws on adverse child experiences research, which shows very clearly that there are strong connections, as I said earlier, between a child's experience of abuse and their ability to perform well in school. For instance, in 2011, Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, who is one of the leading AC scholars, thinkers in the world, published out of Stanford University a piece of research in which they found that children who have had 4 or more adverse child experiences, meaning who have, let's say, experienced poverty, neglect, sexual abuse, and something else, are 32 times more likely to struggle in school than children who have not had those experiences, or 32 times more likely to have behavioral challenges. And when you look at this research in the UK, the little bit of research on ACs we've done in the Caribbean, these numbers are always consistent. So when you see a problematic student in a classroom, like me, being mischievous, giving a lot of trouble, do not respond to that with violence. Do not respond to that with aggression. Try to understand, or do not diagnose the kids, which is happening a lot now with ADHD, and putting them on medication. Try to understand what experiences these children are having at their homes and even within the schools. And if you can see how you can connect these experiences to particular academic outcomes. Kids learn from people who they feel love them, who they can trust, who maintain that trust, who are consistent. There's this quote that I love, perhaps one of my favorite quotes on education, that kids who are loved at home come to school to learn, but those who aren't come to school to be loved. And for those kids who are at school to be loved, if they do not get that love that they need, it will be very difficult for them to overcome those academic and intellectual barriers. And of course, this love, I see, yes, this love has to be practical too. If a kid is hungry, the kid won't learn. If a kid was molested last night, as happens very frequently in the Caribbean, the kid will likely not learn. All of these things, these small things, are really important in getting the best out of our children.
You've mentioned a lot there, and it opens the door for another kind of conversation, because sometimes if you talk with some teachers may think to themselves, I'm just here to teach. I'm not here to for example, be a policeman. I'm not here to be a counselor. I'm not here to feed anyone. I'm just throwing that in for the sake of the conversation. It's not like persons are necessarily saying these things. But
they are. And it is true. It is true, which is exactly why you need to have this conversation. Because when you're dealing with children, you're not dealing, as is the case with everyone else, with one sort of dimensional people. You have to fulfill the particular needs, distinct needs that children have in order to reach them. In the same way that you have to fulfill the particular needs that your car has, quote unquote, in order for it to function well. You focus on one thing, it doesn't have one tire, then it's not going to function well.
I like that analogy. You had mentioned that there was a book launch when it is that you came back to your island to make your book available to persons. How would you feel if it is that your writings weren't just used for leisure, but rather it was implemented in schools as part of a curricula to help persons with their reading and with their comprehension skills? How would you feel about something like that?
That's an interesting question, and this is a challenge for many Caribbean authors. You see, this book, Rohan Bullkin, The Shadows, was launched initially by the Center for Child Counseling out of Florida, and it was a nice feature on CBS Florida, and it was a whole bit of excitement. And I thought, surely the government of Jamaica is going to pick this up because it's obviously of value. And I'm on this government-led committee, and so I'm an insider. Nothing like that happened. And we have so many books written by Caribbean people who can help, but to get your own people to see your work and to value your work is one of the hardest things, the hardest thing in the Caribbean. So you're gonna have to help us with that one. I don't know. So I'm pretty sure, and it's just not just a financial thing. Even if I get nothing from this, that this book would help many kids going through what I went through. But you know how it is in our region.
If persons, even though it hasn't been implemented or adopted by like groups or authorities, etc., if persons wanted to get copies of them, where could we get them?
Everywhere. Just type in Rohan Bullkin and The Shadows or Juleus Ghunta and books behind my name, and they're everywhere. Books are available online. Or you can contact Caribbean Reads. You type Caribbean Reads Publishing, and you will see their emails, contact information, and you'll be able to get books from them directly at reduced costs.
Again, you seem to be well accomplished and well traveled, and you asked me not to ask you your age, so I will not ask you your age. But in terms of your pursuits, whether they be academic, whether they be personal, what do you want to share with us? What is in store for Mr. Ghunta in the year 2024?
Well, one thing I'm excited about is my forthcoming co-authored peer-reviewed book chapter, which is coming from Teachers College Press, based at Columbia University. This will be my first academic chapter published work of this nature, and I'm really excited about that. And again, this is an expansion of my work on Rohan Bullkin and The Shadows, and I'm really excited to see what will come out of that experience. And I'm hoping to complete a collection of poems by late next year, and fortunately, hopefully as well, to find sort of a great publishing house, maybe an agent to help me to with the monetary aspect of things. And also, hopefully, I will complete another picture book by next year.
Okay. I mean, where writing is concerned, it seems like you're stepping on the gas. You're not letting up at all.
Well, most days, like yesterday, maybe tomorrow, feel like I'm not doing enough, but I'm happy that some things are actually being done.
When it is that we look at the things that you've been involved in, the committees, the fact that you're writing, the fact that you're holding down 3 jobs right now at this time in your life. For a person who's listening to this podcast who may want to get into writing themselves after hearing your story, after hearing your accounts, what advice would you give to them?
I don't know if I have any really good advice. I would simply say read. Just read as much as you can. This is a piece of advice that everybody, you know what? Read Shitty First Drafts. That's actually the title of a piece of writing by Anne Lamott, Shitty First Drafts, which talks about the fact that even the greatest writers, and I certainly don't count myself among them, struggle and struggle and struggle. A writer sometimes takes 25 years to complete a book, depending on what. I love to tell the story very quickly of J.K. Rowling, author of the Harry Potter series, whose book was rejected 12 times before it was published, and look at what she became. Or Marlon James, our Booker Prize-winning novelist in Jamaica, whose first book was rejected 78 times. So read and persist.
Well said and simple. Read, persist. 2 words.
Yes.
Well, this brings us to the end of our interview at this time. Mr. Ghunta, thank you very much for making yourself available. Thank you very much for sharing of yourself and also of your works. I believe that we have been both educated and encouraged by your offering at this point in time.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me and for doing this work for Caribbean writers.
I just like to close by saying, when it is that you choose to do the autobiography again, I'm just repeating it. When you do the autobiography, reach out to us, because we'll be more than willing to hear more details about it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. So thank you again for agreeing to be interviewed, and we wish you all the best in all your takings and in all your endeavors. Take care of yourself, and we look forward to hearing great things.
You too. Thank you very much. All right. Take care.
Okay. You as well, Mr. Ghunta.
You've been listening to TLC, Tropical Literature Creators. If you've heard something of interest or something you like, reach out to us. Reach out to our authors. Follow us on social media. We look forward to hearing from you.